would like to get everyone standing up.
Yeah. Now, we would like to poll the room on how well we represent Australia's immigration diversity.
So please sit down if your family has lived in Australia for 4 or more generations.
Now please sit down if your grandparents were immigrants.
Now please sit down if your parents were immigrants.
Well, the remaining audience represents the 28% of first-generation immigrants living in Australia. Please have a seat.
Australia is a nation of stories.
From all our different cultures and backgrounds, what connects us is the stories that we share with each other.
A second-generation Australian is defined as an Australian-born person with at least one parent that's immigrated from overseas.
And we,
Rhiann,
Jenny,
Amy,
Rakshitha,
define ourselves as that.
According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, of all the immigrants living in Australia, 21% are second-generation immigrants.
as having such a diverse group of people living in our country, it is of vital importance to share and listen to each other's stories in order to embrace one another's differences.
Listening to the 50%.
when I was 8, I hated being Taiwanese. And so when my mum picked me up from school and she drove me home, we just argued and argued. And as she parked the car, she turned to me and asked, "Why do you hate who you are?" Because when I was 8, everything about my culture repulsed me. My mum's Taiwanese, and she wanted to raise me with as much connection to her culture as possible. So as a baby, I learned how to speak Chinese alongside English. When I started going to school, I also started going to Chinese school. At home, we mainly spoke Chinese. The food we ate and the TV we watched, that was all Chinese, and I hated it. I'm sure it's pretty obvious, but I don't look very Asian, and I have my dad to thank for that. So when I started at primary school, I was in a year level full of Aussie kids that looked like me. But this confused me so much because when I went to school, I would be speaking English with my friends and would be just playing and laughing. But when I went home, I would have to speak Chinese. But I couldn't speak Chinese at school. So the first thing to go was the food that my mum made me. She always cooked all these delicious homemade meals with rice and tofu and beans, but I threw those out because the other kids said they smelled weird. And I went to Chinese school every single weekend, but eventually I ended up trying to hide my homework and begged my mum to stop taking me because these things made me different. And things got to the point where it was so bad and I was so embarrassed about who I was that I wouldn't even talk to my mum when we went out in public. And I did all of this because I wanted to fit in with all my Aussie-looking friends. But through this and through my repulsion of who I was, I've come to realize that that was just such a saddening part of my rejection. I should have been embracing who I was because my mom's Taiwanese and that makes me half Taiwanese. Being able to speak, read and write a different language that is completely different from English is amazing. And being able to celebrate all these different cultural traditions with my Taiwanese family and friends is unique, and that is something to be celebrated. And these are things that make me, me. By embracing my culture and incorporating it into my identity, that's helped me find a clearer vision in who I want to be, how other people see me, and how I find my place in the world.
When I was in preschool, the only language I could speak was Chinese. I couldn't even speak English, but much like Rhiann, I wanted to fit in with my English-speaking friends, so Chinese took a backbench and becoming fluent in English became my first priority. The older I got, the more I didn't want to go to Chinese school. It became too time-consuming and too complicated, so I lost interest in learning the language, and as a result, lost touch with my Chinese heritage. By the time I quit in Year 5, I could only read and write the basic characters. And even though I could speak more than I could read and write, I resorted to Chinglish, where I naturally filled the holes in my Chinese sentences with English. I noticed this especially when I went back to China to visit my relatives. I felt like I couldn't even communicate fluently with them. When I was asked questions, I had the answers I wanted to reply with, but I couldn't find the words to express myself. This made me feel inadequate. It made me feel not Chinese enough, and I was detached from my roots. So as I've gotten older, I've come to regret the rejection of my Chinese language. And now I've learned to put the regrets behind me and finally embrace my Chinese culture. I've noticed that unconsciously, within my everyday hobbies, I incorporate elements of my culture. Within my artworks, I continually revisit traditional Chinese imagery. And with these realizations, I consciously use more Mandarin in my daily life. Although exploring my culture through art may not be an explicit link to my Chinese heritage, I believe that these small acts add up and help me create a connection with my Chinese heritage. When I've talked about this with my friends and how I don't feel Chinese enough, they too related to feeling a similar disconnect with their cultures. So together, we supported each other to redefine what embodying our culture means to us. From this episode in my life, it has led me to gain insight into the importance of my cultural background in my identity. That I should not let go of my roots, and that these language barriers should not stand in the way of allowing me to strongly identify with my Chinese heritage. So what about you, Amy?
Yes, I've definitely had an experience similar to that. Growing up in China and coming over at the age of 5 to join my parents. Coming over, my mum desperately wanted to integrate me into Western culture, while not wanting to pressure me with learning Mandarin at the same time. So, my sluggish primary school days passed with me being bullied for not being fluent in English, but mum not letting me go to Chinese school because she wanted me to focus on English. I came out the other end with somewhat okay skills in English, but 0 to none in Chinese. The good news is that I can read and understand Mandarin quite fluently because in my early high school days, I begged my grandpa to teach me Mandarin while he attempted to do Tai Chi on the porch. But sometimes, I'm scared I'll never be Chinese enough because I was never formally taught the language. But like Jenny says, we all try to honour and stay true to our culture in our own ways, whether that be through doing artwork like her or reading and writing about Chinese literature like myself. And these experiences made me realise something. Our identity isn't a black and white issue. My identity isn't some big cordial drink made of 3 parts Australian and 7 parts Chinese. We are all made by the elements that make us unique, and every one of us here is unique because of our diverse experiences. So let's embrace this because it's up to you who you want to be. As I mentioned, my grandpa was a really influential person in my life. He was brought up on a farm in a small village near the capital of China, and by hard work and education, he made his way to the mega city of Shanghai and became a wind energy engineer. Sounds like a model inspirational story, right? Well, I believe stories like these are why a major part of all our culture is the value of education and why we're all pushed by an expectation to succeed. Growing up in Australia, it doesn't take a wind engineer to work out to notice that it's mostly the Asian kids, the immigrant Asian kids, that go to tuition on a Sunday afternoon. Because imagine this, your family migrated from oceans away to this foreign land that they feel displaced in the hopes that you can have a better education and a chance of a better life. A life with less competition and more opportunities. So this pressure to do well in school becomes so real for all of us. Isn't that right, Rakshitha?
Yeah, I can relate to that on many levels. Along the same lines as Amy, I've had and still have many expectations that surround every step I take forward in life. These expectations come from my parents as well as those of extended family and friends that surround me, whether it be the path I take forward in life or simple as what I choose to wear. My auntie called me one day and she spent 30 minutes, let me repeat that, 30 minutes trying to convince me that I should become a doctor, study medicine, and earn lots of money. But I decided to politely reject her offer. But that took quite a lot of courage. These expectations that surround you should not limit or define you, but encourage you to do better and go beyond the limits.
Yeah, and I feel like these expectations to succeed are things that also sometimes set us apart. And it also helps us, or doesn't really help us, feel like we belong here. Do you ever feel that?
Yeah, I feel that. The struggle of identifying where I belong has trailed along with me for quite some time. A strong part of me strongly identified as an Australian, The small part of me reminds me of my parents' culture, India, and how I'm equally connected to it as they are. My mother said to me, I want to move back, it just doesn't feel like home here. I strongly rejected her statement, as I wanted to stay in this country that enhanced our lives and made it more amazing than it could ever be. However, soon later, I started to empathize with her. If I was in her position, I would have most likely felt the same. You see, by talking more to your family members, you can feel more connected to your own culture, and they can feel like they belong here.
Embracing our culture and incorporating it into our identity has helped us
find a clearer vision in who we want to be,
how other people see us,
and to find our place in our world.
All the stories we have shared with you today have come from our own personal experiences, these experiences that have shaped who we are.
For all of us, being a second-generation Australian has caused us to feel a lack of belonging and disconnect to our heritage.
However, this has been overcome by us sharing our stories with others and them sharing their experiences, resulting in us working together to embrace who we are.
The majority of second-generation Australians still identify and follow their parental heritage, while also embracing their Australian ethnicity.
If you ask the second-generation Australian what they identified as, the answer you'll most likely receive is Italian Australian, Chinese Australian, or something along that variation.
In our experience, this inclination for second-generation Australians to first identify with their parental heritage is caused by a number of factors.
It is easier to feel connected to your culture when you include it in your label. It also demonstrates a level of pride in your culture.
This preference highlights the way culture shapes our identity and how it plays a key role in developing ourselves.
Australia is a nation of stories.
Australia is also a land rich with culture.
We have realised that storytelling is essential in keeping culture alive.
It has helped us comprehend our cultural identity and has helped those around us feel like they belong in this beautiful country.
Sharing stories doesn't have to just be left to the people who are famous, whose stories have a big impact.
The power of sharing stories is just as important from people like us to people like you.
To share stories between a diversity of people is the connecting link that bridges gaps between cultures and generations, bringing people together.
We want to encourage all of you to share your stories and experiences and listen to others as well.
There are 24.6 million people in Australia, half of whom are immigrants.
And to take the time out of your day to listen to someone else's story
is taking the time to embrace and understand their culture.
So please, don't hesitate to share your story.
Thank you for listening to the 50%.